You've seen it. A younger woman, confident, options clearly available, and she's chosen him. Older, quieter, doesn't perform, and you probably had a reaction to that. Maybe curiosity, maybe something closer to confusion, because the explanations you've been given for why this happens, the ones people argue about online, the ones thrown around at dinner tables, have never quite settled the question for you. They explain the surface. They don't explain what's underneath it. Here's what I want you to sit with for a moment. There is something she keeps choosing that the men around her age simply cannot give her, and she probably couldn't explain it even if you asked her directly. Not because she's hiding something, but because the pull she's responding to operates below the level of language. It registers in her body before it registers in her mind. That gap between what she feels and what she can put into words is exactly what most men never think to look at. By the end of this video, you're going to understand what she is actually responding to. Not the version of this story that gets told on the surface, the real mechanics, the ones that change how you see every interaction around you once you understand them. Most people land on one of three explanations, and most people are partially right and almost entirely wrong. The first explanation is money. He has financial stability she can't find in men her own age. And yes, security matters. It has always mattered, and pretending otherwise isn't honest. But here's where this explanation breaks. If financial security were the primary driver, the pattern would be consistent across every woman with access to it. It isn't. Wealthy older men are frequently passed over, and younger women in these relationships who earn their own income, sometimes more than he does, don't leave when that security factor equalizes. So money explains part of the environment. It does not explain the choice. The second explanation is what people often call the father figure dynamic. She's seeking something she missed. She's substituting. She's working through something unresolved. Of course, early attachment patterns absolutely shape adult romantic templates, and that part is true. But applying this explanation as a blanket answer to every age gap relationship reduces something genuinely complex to a convenient dismissal. The research on attachment doesn't support that conclusion at the scale people assume. The third explanation is social status. She's climbing. She wants access to his world, his network, his name. And again, social context matters in attraction. Nobody operates outside it. But if status were the central mechanism, the pattern would track consistently with the highest status men available, regardless of age. That isn't what happens either. Each of these explanations describes something she might get from the relationship. None of them describe what she actually feels, and those are not the same thing. She's not reading his age. She's reading what his age has done to him, and her body responds before her mind catches up. This is the piece that most explanations skip entirely, and it's the most important one. Attraction in women is not primarily a cognitive process. It is a nervous system process. What her body is scanning for, constantly, automatically, without her conscious involvement, are signals of emotional regulation. Evidence that the person in front of her has been tested by life and has not been broken by it. The technical term for this is co-regulation. It refers to the way one person's nervous system responds to and is influenced by another's. When your system is calm and settled, it creates a kind of gravitational pull on the systems around you. Her nervous system reads that steadiness and interprets it as safety. And safety at the level of biology is the precondition for deep attraction. Now you might be thinking, doesn't that describe comfort, not desire? And this is where it gets interesting, because for most women, those two things are not separate categories. Desire rooted in emotional safety is experienced as deeper, more consuming, and more durable than desire rooted in novelty or excitement. What her nervous system is seeking when it scans for regulation is not a companion, it's a foundation. An older man who has navigated failure, loss, professional setbacks, and personal reinvention carries that history in the way he holds himself, the way he pauses before responding, the way he doesn't fill silence with performance, the way he can sit with uncertainty without requiring it to resolve immediately. These are not incidental details. They are readable. Her system reads them. That steadiness produces a response in her that she will likely describe as feeling safe with him, comfortable with him, able to be herself. But underneath those words is something more precise. Her nervous system recognized a regulated system and oriented toward it. The attraction came from that recognition. There are 4 things she keeps returning to in her own mind, even if she describes them differently every time someone asks. The first is what I would call unperformed confidence. Not loudness, not dominance, not the kind of presence that announces itself the moment someone walks into a room. It's something quieter and far more compelling. He knows what he's capable of without needing the room to confirm it. He doesn't calibrate his behavior based on whether he's being watched or appreciated. She can feel the difference between a man performing strength and a man who simply has it. And the distinction is immediate, even when she can't name what she's responding to. The second is emotional fluency. He can identify what's happening in a moment and name it without dramatizing it. This is rarer than it sounds. Most people, regardless of age, either avoid naming emotion entirely or amplify it. An older man who has done enough living to understand his own interior landscape can say simply and quietly, "I think what's bothering you isn't what you just said it is," and then not need to be right. That capacity to read emotional texture and engage with it calmly is something she has likely encountered rarely in men closer to her age. The third is what I'd describe as decisiveness without aggression. He leads without needing her to acknowledge the leadership. He makes a decision, where to go, how to handle a situation, what actually matters in a given moment. And the decision comes from clarity rather than control. The difference is detectable. Controlling behavior requires her participation to function. Decisive behavior simply moves. One contracts the space around her, the other expands it. The fourth, and in some ways the most disorienting for men who encounter it from the outside, is his comfort with silence and space. He doesn't fill every gap. He doesn't explain himself continuously. He doesn't require her attention to remain anchored in a conversation. There are pauses that he doesn't rush to close, and those pauses read at a nervous system level as a specific kind of security. A man who can be quiet without anxiety is a man who doesn't need her to manage his emotional state. That is extraordinarily attractive, not as a concept, but as an experience she has likely never had described to her. These four qualities are not a checklist. They are a coherent signal. Together they communicate one thing. Here is a person who has already become something, and that becoming is felt before it is thought. If you've ever asked a woman why she's with an older man and found her answer strangely vague, that vagueness is data, not deflection. The reason she struggles to explain her own attraction is not evasiveness. It is the structure of how attraction is processed. Primary attraction, the kind that precedes rational evaluation, is handled by parts of the brain that do not have direct access to language. The limbic system, which governs emotional response, communicates in sensation and impulse. It does not compile reports. What this means in practice is that she experiences her attraction to him fully and clearly and with certainty, and then reaches for words and finds only approximations. He's mature. He listens. He makes me feel safe. He's different from other men. All of these are real. All of them are also her conscious mind reverse engineering a decision that was made somewhere she cannot directly observe. This is worth sitting with because it has a significant implication. If you ask her why she chose him and you get a vague answer, the vagueness is not a sign that the attraction is shallow. It may actually be a sign that the attraction is deep, that it was generated at a level below the verbal, which means it was generated at the level where lasting bonding is formed. Of course, this doesn't mean all attraction that resists explanation is trustworthy or healthy. Context always matters here, but in the context of these relationships, the ones that are genuine and lasting rather than transactional, the depth of the attraction frequently exceeds her ability to articulate it. Remember what I told you at the start, that there was something she keeps choosing that men around her age cannot give her, and that she probably couldn't explain it even if you asked her directly. We are getting close to that full answer now. This doesn't apply to every younger woman, and that's exactly the point. It applies to a specific version of her at a specific moment in her life. There is a developmental window that modern psychology recognizes, but popular conversation rarely examines with precision. It typically opens somewhere in the late 20s and moves through the early to mid-30s, though the timing varies. What defines it isn't a number. What defines it is a specific form of self-knowledge reaching a threshold. She knows enough about herself to understand what emotional immaturity costs her. She's had enough relationships or watched enough of them from the inside to recognize certain patterns before they complete. She knows what it feels like to be with someone who is still becoming, and she knows the specific kind of exhaustion that produces, not because those relationships were bad, but because they required her to carry weight that she didn't realize she was carrying until she wasn't anymore. At this stage, she isn't necessarily seeking an older man. She is seeking specific qualities, and she is finding, sometimes to her own surprise, that she is encountering those qualities primarily in men who have lived more. The same woman who would have found an older man uninteresting at 22 may find herself genuinely deeply drawn at 29. Not because she changed her preferences consciously, because her capacity to read what she actually needs has developed. This window is real. It's temporary in the sense that it opens and then, over time, either closes or shifts, and it explains something that often confuses observers from the outside: the apparent inconsistency. How the same woman who seemed uninterested in this kind of connection a few years ago now seems to seek it actively. It's not that men her age are doing something wrong, it's that they're doing something early, something that still needs another decade to settle. There are 3 structural gaps, and they are worth understanding precisely because they are not criticisms. They are descriptions of a developmental stage that every man moves through. The first is an unresolved identity. A man in his late 20s or early 30s is still in the process of becoming. He is figuring out who he is in his work, in his relationships, in his values. That process is necessary and admirable, but it produces a particular kind of emotional instability that she reads as unpredictability. Not danger, necessarily, but variability. And variability at a nervous system level requires her to remain alert. Alertness is the opposite of relaxation, and she cannot be both alert and deeply attracted at the same time. The second is what I'd call the approval-seeking pattern. Younger men frequently need her to confirm that things are good between them. They look for evidence that she's still interested, still engaged, still choosing them. That need on its own is entirely understandable, but it inverts the emotional dynamic in a way she feels immediately. When he needs her reassurance to feel secure, she becomes the regulator of his emotional state. And that is an exhausting role to occupy while simultaneously trying to experience attraction. The third is emotional reactivity, the tendency to escalate when she tests or withdraws rather than holding steady. Testing is something women do, often without full conscious awareness, to assess emotional resilience. When the response to her test is escalation, defensiveness, anxiety, over-explaining, pursuit, she reads that as confirmation that the foundation is less solid than she hoped. When the response is steadiness, calm, non-reactive presence that doesn't take the bait, she reads that as exactly the opposite. These 3 gaps are not permanent. They close. They close through accumulated experience, through loss, through failure, through the specific kind of education that only time provides. Most men, when a woman gets quieter around them, assume they've lost her. With this dynamic, it's often the opposite. This is the signal I've been holding back, and it is the most consistently misread one. The behavior she displays when she is genuinely orienting toward an older man is not escalation. It is reduction. She simplifies. The social performance she maintains with peers, the maintenance behavior, the wit used as armor, the energy spent managing how she's perceived begins to drop away. She stops filling silences for his benefit. She stops performing interest and starts simply being present. She might sit with him in a conversation and say less than she would say with anyone else, not because she has nothing to say, but because she doesn't feel required to say it. Around most people, she manages impressions continuously. Around him, that management quiets. You'll notice it in specific, observable ways. The pace of her speech slows slightly. She asks questions that have no strategic purpose. She's genuinely curious about what he thinks, not building toward a conclusion. She doesn't reach for her phone when the conversation pauses. She lets the pause exist, and she holds eye contact in a way that feels less like engagement and more like rest, as if looking at him requires no effort. Now, you might reasonably wonder, couldn't this just be introversion or distraction or tiredness? And sometimes, yes, context always has to be held, but the distinguishing factor is consistency and direction. These behaviors appear specifically in his presence and specifically when the dynamic is forming. She is not quieter with everyone. She is quieter with him. That directional specificity is the signal. The most common mistake men make when they encounter this behavior is to interpret it as cooling interest and respond by increasing their own output, talking more, becoming more entertaining, working harder to hold her attention. This is the precise wrong move. Her reduction is not a gap asking to be filled. It is a doorway opening. The correct response is to receive it with the same steadiness that produced it. That is the moment most men walk away from without realizing it. The whole arc of this dynamic, the attraction, the developmental window, the four qualities, the nervous system response, it all arrives at this single observable moment. She gets quieter, she performs less, she trusts the silence. And the men who understand what that silence means are the ones she remembers. Everything we've covered today points to one underlying truth. What she is responding to in an older man is not a category. It is not an age bracket or a tax return or a paternal resemblance. It is a quality of presence that is built, not assumed. A settledness that comes from having been tested and remaining intact, a capacity to hold steady in the moments when steadiness is the most powerful thing a person can offer. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to perform any of what we've talked about today. In fact, performance is precisely what undoes it. What she is reading is what's actually there. The accumulated weight of a life lived with some degree of deliberateness. The quiet that comes from not needing to prove anything. If you've recognized yourself in any of this, or recognized a moment you didn't fully understand at the time, that recognition is itself meaningful. It means you are already seeing something you were looking at before without quite seeing it. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had a moment where a younger woman got quieter around you and you didn't know what to make of it at the time? I read everyone. If this kind of inside look at female psychology is something you want more of, subscribe. Because on this channel, we go underneath the surface explanations to the mechanics that actually drive behavior. In the next video, I'm going to explain something that flips this entire dynamic. Why the moment an older man stops pursuing is often the exact moment she starts. That one will change how you see your own behavior.